Amara stood frozen in the middle of the small, cluttered living room, her hands trembling as her father's angry voice echoed around. "How could you bring this shame to our family?" Kofi's eyes blazed with anger, and for a moment, Amara thought he might not stop shouting. She clutched her small bag tightly, the only thing she had managed to pack in the chaos of the argument. Her heart ached, not just from his words, but from the sharp sting of betrayal. The father she had loved and trusted had suddenly become a stranger. Tears streamed down her face as she felt the weight of her situation pressing down on her. She was pregnant, alone, and now homeless in the city that had once felt like home. Memories of her father's harsh words collided with flashes of happier times, his laughter, the warmth of his embrace. But those moments felt like they belonged to someone else. Anger, sadness, and fear mixed into a heavy knot in her chest. With a final glance at the house that had held her childhood, Amara stepped out into the noisy streets of Lagos. The heat and chaos of the city seemed overwhelming, but beneath it all, a small spark of determination flickered. She didn't know how she would survive, but she knew she had to. Her child depended on her. Every step she took away from her father's home was painful, but it was also the first step toward the life she would now have to fight for. The betrayal hurt, but it also planted the seed of a courage she hadn't realized she possessed. Amara stepped into the crowded streets of Lagos with nothing but her small bag and a heart full of worry. The city was loud, chaotic, and unforgiving, but it was the only place she had to start over. Every corner seemed to buzz with people hustling for their daily bread, and she quickly realized that survival here would not be easy. The thought of her unborn child, Tay, kept her moving forward, even when her body ached and her stomach growled from skipped meals. She found a small room to rent in a rundown building tucked between narrow alleys. The walls were cracked, the floor uneven, and the bathroom had no hot water, but it was hers, at least for now. Each night, as she lay on the thin mattress, she would trace the small movements of her growing baby with her hand and whisper promises she hoped she could keep. She promised Tay a life of love, care, and dignity, even if it meant sacrificing everything else for him. To make ends meet, Amara began selling goods at a busy market. She hawked vegetables, small household items, and anything else that could bring in a little money. The work was grueling. She woke before dawn, carried heavy crates through crowded streets, and shouted over the noise of the market to attract customers. Sometimes, people would bargain her down to almost nothing, and at the end of the day, her earnings barely covered rent and food. Still, she refused to give up. Every coin she earned felt like a small victory, a step toward the future she wanted for her child. Loneliness often crept in during quiet moments. She missed her family, even though they had turned their backs on her. Memories of her father's anger and her mother's absence haunted her, but they also fueled a quiet fire inside. She reminded herself constantly that she was building a life not for herself, but for Tay. That thought made the struggle bearable. She learned to navigate the city streets, make friends among other vendors, and find small ways to stretch her limited money. Slowly, she started to feel a sense of independence, even amid the daily battles. There were days when the weight of it all seemed too heavy, when she wondered if she would ever manage to give Tay the life he deserved. But each time she looked at her growing belly, she felt a surge of strength. She pictured him going to school, playing with friends, and growing up safe and proud. Those dreams kept her moving forward, and little by little, Amara began to carve out a place for herself in the vast, unfeeling city. Every hardship reminded her of what she had lost, but also of what she could gain. Lagos was tough, and so was she. With each passing day, Amara's determination hardened, and her hope for a better life for Tay became a beacon guiding her through the darkest moments. She may have started alone, but she was slowly building a foundation for the future she refused to let anyone take away. Amara's days became a blur of early mornings and late nights, each one filled with work and worry. After months of struggling to make ends meet as a market vendor, she realized that if she wanted a better life for Tay, she would have to do more than just survive. She had to build. Every coin she saved, every small extra she could scrape together, was carefully set aside, tucked into a box under her mattress, growing slowly but steadily. She had learned to budget with precision, cutting out every unnecessary expense, eating simpler meals, and walking miles instead of taking transport, all so that her child could have a future she had been denied. The first small venture came almost by accident. A customer at the market asked if she could sell handmade beads, and Amara saw an opportunity. She pooled some of her savings and bought materials to make jewelry, spending long evenings crafting pieces by hand after the market closed. At first, sales were slow, and she worried about wasting precious money, but she refused to give up. Word spread, and soon, neighbors and market-goers began to seek her out specifically. Every bracelet, necklace, and set of earrings sold was a victory, proof that she could create something valuable from nothing. Tay became her motivation in every sense. Even before he was born, she imagined his laughter, his small hands reaching for hers, and the kind of life she wanted for him. She wanted him to grow up proud of his mother, knowing that she had fought every day for him. That thought kept her going during the days when exhaustion made her bones ache, when the Lagos sun beat down mercilessly, and when it felt like the city was against her. As her ventures grew, Amara began to gain recognition in her community. People started to admire her determination and honesty. She never cheated a customer, never took shortcuts, and always treated everyone with respect, even when they treated her poorly. Slowly, respect replaced the initial skepticism and pity that many had shown her. Vendors shared tips, neighbors offered support, and some even became friends. For the first time, she felt a sense of belonging, not because of her family, but because of the strength she had built on her own. Amara's independence didn't come without sacrifices. She missed celebrations, rest, and sometimes even proper meals, but each sacrifice strengthened her resolve. She learned to manage multiple ventures, from selling jewelry to small grocery items, and even helping other market women with their accounts. Every day was a test, and she faced it with grit and determination. By the time Tay was born, Amara had carved out a small but solid life for them both. Her reputation as a hardworking, honest, and resilient woman spread beyond the market, and she began to realize that strength was not just surviving. It was building, planning, and earning the respect she had always longed. She may have started alone, but through effort, patience, and unwavering determination, Amara had become someone the city, and soon her family, could not ignore. Amara was stacking crates of fruit at the market when she overheard a conversation between two women nearby. They were talking in hushed tones, their eyes darting around as if they feared being overheard. "Have you heard about Kofi?" one whispered. "His business is failing, and the children are struggling to keep up." At first, Amara tried to push the news aside. She had worked too hard to let old wounds distract her. But the words kept echoing in her mind. Kofi, her father, the man who had thrown her out when she needed him most, was now struggling, and her siblings were facing hardships she remembered all too well from her own childhood. A part of her felt a pang of guilt, another a strange mix of curiosity and longing. She had imagined this city as her new life, separate from the family that had rejected her, yet now the thought of them stirred something she hadn't expected, a desire for acknowledgement, not pity, not revenge, but recognition of what she had achieved on her own. Memories of her father's harshness returned vividly. She could see him shouting, scolding her for mistakes she hadn't even made, the sharpness in his eyes that made her stomach churn. She remembered the night he kicked her out, the cold streets of Lagos pressing against her back as she walked away with only a small bag. And yet, buried beneath the pain, there was a quiet yearning. Amara had always wanted his approval, his pride, even if she had never admitted it aloud. For days, she wrestled with the idea of going back. She knew she could confront him now as an equal, or even as someone who had surpassed him in ways he could never imagine. She pictured walking into the neighborhood, Tay at her side, confident and unshaken, and letting the world see the woman she had become. She didn't want to return out of anger or to gloat. She wanted to reclaim what she had lost, the dignity and respect that had been denied to her, and perhaps to show her family that strength was earned, not given. Amara's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Could she forgive him? Could she forgive the past while still standing firm in the life she had built? The idea of returning was frightening, but also thrilling. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a reunion not filled with shame or fear, but one where she stood tall and unshaken, her child beside her, a living testament to her resilience. As she closed her eyes that night, the hum of the city around her, Amara made a quiet decision. She would return, but on her terms. Not as the scared girl who had once begged for love and acceptance, but as a woman who had fought tooth and nail for every small victory, every ounce of respect. The idea filled her with a strange sense of power, a mix of anticipation and purpose. The city outside was still bustling, still chaotic, but inside her, a new chapter was beginning to take shape. A chapter where she would face her past not with tears, but with strength and clarity. Amara felt a strange mix of nerves and excitement as the bus rolled into her old neighborhood. The streets were the same, familiar cracks in the pavement, vendors shouting, children playing, but she saw them differently now. She was no longer the scared, pregnant girl who had walked these roads years ago. Now she was a woman who had fought for every bit of success she had, and she carried herself with quiet confidence. Tay sat beside her, neatly dressed, his small hand tucked into her. Every glance at him reminded her why she had come back. The first thing she did was rent a spacious, well-kept apartment just a few blocks from her father's house. It wasn't flashy in a showy way, but it spoke of comfort, stability, and accomplishment. From the outside, neighbors could see the polished cars, the fresh paint, the clean windows. To anyone who had once doubted her, It was a clear message. She had built something for herself, and she had arrived. As the days passed, whispers began to circulate. People who had once ignored or pitied her now stopped to greet her, curious about the changes in her life. "Isn't that Amara?" someone would say, pointing as she walked past. "Look at her son. And her home. She's done well for herself." The attention was new and strange, but she didn't let it unsettle her. She greeted neighbors politely, smiled, and went about her day, careful to show humility even as she exuded success. Her father's house came into view one morning as she took Tay to the local park. Kofi was there, talking with some neighbors, and the sight of Amara froze him in his tracks. The girl he had once dismissed, the one he had sent away, was standing tall and poised, her son by her side looking proud and confident. He didn't recognize the woman before him at first. The sharp tailoring of her clothes, the calm strength in her eyes, the ease with which she navigated the world around her. Every detail spoke of a life built from hard work, not luck. Amara didn't rush to meet him. She allowed the transformation to be noticed naturally. She smiled at old acquaintances, engaged politely in small talk, and carried herself as someone completely secure in her place in the world. The power wasn't in shouting or proving anything. It was in showing, quietly and steadily, that she had become someone her father could no longer ignore. Tay's laughter in the park reminded her that this was more than personal triumph. It was proof that she had created a safe, nurturing environment for her child, something Kofi had once refused her. Each day, each interaction, subtly shifted the neighborhood's perception. The whispers of doubt turned into admiration, and the judgment she had once feared faded in the face of undeniable evidence. Amara had grown, thrived, and returned stronger than anyone could have imagined. For the first time since leaving, she felt the quiet satisfaction of being in control of her story. She had returned not as a vulnerable girl, but as a mother, a businesswoman, and a woman who had earned her place in the world, on her own terms. And that made every step she took in the neighborhood, every glance from former skeptic, feel like a victory in itself. Kofi was walking through the busy market, his mind on the bills piling up and the troubles at his shop, when he nearly collided with someone at a corner stall. He looked up and froze. There she was, Amara, the same girl he had thrown out years ago, but not the scared, tearful girl he remembered. She was tall, confident, and moved with a calm assurance that made him step back. And then he saw Tay, his grandson. The boy was neatly dressed, his uniform crisp, shoes polished, and he held himself with a quiet confidence that mirrored his mother. Kofi's heart skipped a beat, but not in a good way. It was shock, disbelief, and a pang of regret all mixed together. The market noise seemed to fade as he took in the sight before. This was not the helpless girl he had dismissed. This was a woman who had clearly built a life far beyond what he had imagined. Amara noticed him immediately, though she didn't show it. She smiled politely at the vendor she was buying from, exchanged a few words, and waited patiently while her change was counted. Every movement was deliberate, controlled, and full of grace. When she finally turned, her eyes met Kofi's, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with a quiet strength that made him falter. He wanted to speak, to apologize, to ask questions, but the words caught in his throat. "Amara," he started, but she only inclined her head slightly, a small, courteous gesture that felt like both recognition and a gentle reminder of how far she had come. She didn't rush to fill the silence with explanations or accusations. Her calm composure spoke louder than any words could. Kofi looked at her, searching for traces of the frightened girl he had once known, but all he saw was maturity, resilience, and dignity. The tension was almost unbearable. He wanted to understand how she had grown so strong, so self-assured, yet he couldn't find the words to bridge the years of absence and neglect. Each glance at Tay reminded him of the life he had denied his daughter. He felt humbled, confused, and more than a little ashamed, but Amara's measured demeanor made it clear that she had forgiven, if not forgotten, but on her own terms. Amara spoke finally, her voice calm and steady. "Good morning, father," she said, with the faintest hint of warmth but no submission. Kofi's jaw tightened. He wanted to say something, to react, but the pride that had once made him push her away now held him silent. He realized, in that moment, that this encounter was not about him. It was about Amara, her strength, and the life she had built. As she walked away with Tay, Kofi stood rooted to the spot. Every step they took was a reminder that he had underestimated her. She had returned not as the girl he had dismissed, but as a force he could neither ignore nor control. And for the first time, Kofi felt what it was like to be humbled by his own child. Amara invited her father to a small cafe near her apartment, a neutral place where she could speak calmly and clearly. Kofi arrived, unsure what to expect, still wrestling with the shock of seeing her the way she had returned. The girl he had once dismissed now seemed like a stranger who commanded attention without demanding it. Amara began by sharing her journey since leaving home. She spoke about the early days in Lagos, the small market stalls, the long nights spent crafting jewelry and selling goods, and the sacrifices she had made to save every. Her voice was steady, her tone factual, not bitter or accusing, but each word carried the weight of someone who had endured and overcome. Kofi listened quietly, his pride pricked with each detail of her perseverance. Then she told him about the businesses she had built, a small trading company, a boutique selling handmade goods, and even a community service she had started to help other women in the market learn skills and earn a living. She described how she had grown each venture, reinvesting profits, managing challenges, and slowly building a reputation for honesty and reliability. Kofi's eyes widened as he realized the scale of what she had accomplished. This was no small feat for anyone, let alone someone who had started with nothing and faced the kind of hardship she had endured. Amara also spoke of Tay, her son, who had become a symbol of hope and determination. She shared his achievements at school, top grades, awards in sports, and recognition for volunteering in local projects. Her pride in him was clear, but it was more than just a mother boasting. It was evidence of the life she had created through hard work and love. Kofi couldn't help but notice the resemblance between mother and son. The same sharp mind, the same determination, the same quiet confidence. By the time she finished, the cafe felt smaller, charged with a tension that Kofi hadn't anticipated. He had underestimated her strength, her intelligence, and her resilience. For years, he had seen her as fragile, dependent, someone to be controlled or dismissed. Now, he saw clearly that she had built a life he could not control, a life that thrived despite his absence and rejection. Amara didn't need to gloat or demand recognition. Her calm, composed storytelling was enough. Every achievement, every detail, demonstrated that she had grown beyond the girl he had judged so harshly. Kofi felt a mix of shame and awe. He realized that he had underestimated not just her ability to survive, but her ability to succeed and create something lasting, meaningful, and impactful. When she finished, Amara looked at him and smiled slightly, not mockingly, but with the quiet assurance of someone who knew her worth. Kofi, for the first time in years, felt the weight of his mistakes. He had dismissed her, doubted her, and yet here she was, stronger, wiser, and unshakably independent. In that moment, he knew he could no longer see her as the child he once controlled. She had become someone he needed to respect, someone who had redefined what it meant to be his daughter. Amara stepped into the familiar house, the one she had left years ago with nothing but a small bag and a broken heart. The walls were the same, the smell of the place unchanged, but everything else felt different. She was different. She carried herself with a calm confidence that made even the worn furniture seem new, like it had finally earned the right to witness her return. Kofi was there, sitting in his favorite chair, staring at her with a mixture of shock and disbelief. She didn't rush or raise her voice. Instead, she spoke slowly, each word measured. "Father," she began, "I've come back because it's time to talk honestly." Kofi's eyes flickered nervously. He wanted to interrupt, to defend himself, but the look in her eyes stopped him. She continued, recounting the years she had spent surviving in Lagos. She told him about the sleepless nights at the market, the long days of selling goods, and the sacrifices she had made so Tay could have a better life. Amara spoke about the small ventures she had built, the money she had saved, and the community she had helped along the way. She described Tay's achievements at school and in the neighborhood, not to boast, but to show the result of her efforts and resilience. Each sentence painted a picture of determination, courage, and independence, qualities Kofi had never given her credit for before. She didn't yell, she didn't cry, and she didn't accuse. She spoke with a quiet authority that made him listen, truly listen, for the first time in years. She reminded him of the nights she had gone without food, the harsh words she had endured, and the streets she had navigated alone. "I survived," she said, "not because of anyone in this house, but despite being turned away from it. And I did it for Tay. Everything I've done to give him a life you refused to give me." Kofi shifted in his chair, struggling to respond. The daughter he had once dismissed and humiliated now stood before him unshaken, composed, and undeniably strong. He had no words to defend himself, no excuses that could erase the years of rejection. All he could do was watch as she continued, calmly recounting her journey with clarity and purpose. By the time she finished, there was silence in the room. The weight of her story hung in the air, undeniable and undeniable. Kofi realized, perhaps for the first time, the depth of her strength and the magnitude of what he had underestimated. She wasn't the girl who had left his home years ago. She was a woman who had earned every bit of respect she now commanded. Amara took a deep breath, her eyes still steady on him. "I am here," she said softly, "not to punish you, but to be seen for who I am. I've built my life, and I've raised my son, with or without you. I deserve to be recognized." Kofi remained silent, humbled and confused, but a spark of understanding had begun. He had witnessed the growth of the daughter he had once dismissed, and for the first time, he understood the full measure of her power. Amara sat across from her father, the familiar tension of the family home wrapping around them like a heavy blanket. Kofi still looked uncertain, caught somewhere between pride, shame, and confusion. He had seen her strength, her achievements, and yet he struggled to understand how his little girl, the one he had cast out, had transformed into someone he could not control. Amara spoke slowly, choosing her words carefully. "Father, I've returned," she said, "not to fight or to accuse, but to set a new path for us, if you're willing to meet me there." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes steady, her voice calm but firm. "Respect, trust, and recognition aren't things you can demand or take. They are earned. I've spent years building my life, raising Tay, and creating something of value from nothing. I've earned my place. And now, I'm offering a chance for us to reconnect, but on terms that honor that." Kofi opened his mouth, then closed it. He realized that this was not the angry, dependent daughter he had once dismissed. She was deliberate, clear, and unshakably confident. The weight of her words hit him. He had underestimated her, belittled her, and assumed she would never rise above his judgment. Now she was offering reconciliation, but only if it was genuine, equal, and respectful. Amara continued, gently but firmly outlining what she expected. Mutual respect, honest communication, and acknowledgement of the efforts she had made for her life and Tay. She wasn't asking for servitude, obedience, or blind forgiveness, just recognition that she had survived and thrived, and that she would no longer accept being treated as less than she was. For Kofi, it was a humbling moment. He realized that his authority in the family no longer dictated the dynamic. Amara had shifted the balance, not with anger, but with clarity, integrity, and strategic patience. The daughter he had thought weak had become someone capable of defining the terms of her own relationships, including with him. Tay, quietly observing from the side, added a new layer of meaning. He was the living proof of Amara's sacrifices and resilience. Kofi couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and regret. Pride in what his daughter had achieved, and regret for the years he had been absent, for the pain he had caused, and for underestimating the force that Amara had become. By the end of the conversation, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The fear and resentment that had once ruled their interactions were replaced with a cautious respect. Kofi nodded slowly, finally understanding that this was no longer about control, but about connection built on honesty and earned respect. Amara's offer of reconciliation wasn't just about her. It was about setting boundaries, teaching accountability, and showing that power in a family isn't given automatically. She had turned the tables without raising her voice, without vengeance, and without losing her grace. And in that quiet but profound way, she had changed the family forever. Kofi now saw clearly. His daughter was not just strong, she was unstoppable, and anyone who doubted that would learn to respect her on her terms. Amara walked into her family home with a sense of calm she had never felt before. The house was filled with familiar faces, her father, siblings, and even some neighbors who had come to see the reunion. But this time, it wasn't a return of fear or shame. It was a return of respect, of dignity, and of earned authority. Amara had arrived on her own terms, and everyone could see it. Her father, Kofi, greeted her with a quiet nod, the weight of past mistakes lingering in his eye. Her siblings, once skeptical or distant, now looked at her with admiration and curiosity. They saw the woman who had faced the harsh streets of Lagos, built businesses from nothing, and raised a son who was as remarkable as his mother. Amara didn't demand admiration, but it flowed naturally from the evidence of her hard work and unwavering strength. Over the next days, Amara guided her family in small but meaningful ways. She shared her lessons about independence, showing her siblings how to plan, save, and make choices that build long-term security. She spoke to her father about accountability, explaining that respect is earned through action, honesty, and care. Her words were never harsh. They were firm, clear, and filled with wisdom born from lived experience. Slowly, Kofi and the children began to understand that strength was not only about power, but about responsibility, integrity, and resilience. The community began to notice the changes too. People who had once whispered doubts about Amara now spoke of her openly, inspired by her story of triumph against all odds. Mothers in the market shared her journey with their children. Young women looked to her as proof that it was possible to rise above circumstances, and even the local school invited her to speak to students about determination and courage. Her return wasn't just a family matter. It had become a symbol of hope and empowerment. Through it all, Amara maintained her boundaries. She was fully part of her family now, but she had made it clear that it would be on terms that respected her achievements, her independence, and the life she had built for Tay. No longer the vulnerable girl who had been cast out, she had become a woman who taught by example, a living proof that strength, courage, and determination can reshape not only your life, but the lives of those around. In the end, Amara's story wasn't just about reconciliation. It was about empowerment, inspiration, and the quiet, unstoppable force of a woman who refused to be underestimated. Her family had embraced her, the community celebrated her, and she had created a legacy of resilience that would ripple far beyond her own journey.